Okay, so this is the review for the 8.1 through 8.3 quiz. It's all about exponent rules, and if you look over to the right, I have listed the 6 exponent rules that you need for this chapter, and I have numbered them just for sake of discussion through this review. By no means do you need to know, what rule is what number 3 or so on and so forth. But, okay, so it says simplify each expression, all exponents must be positive. So in number 1, we're going to use rule number 1, and we're going to add the exponents to get x to the 9th. Number 2, we're going to use rule number 6, which is to flip when you have a negative exponent. So it's going to be 1 over x to the positive 8. When you flip, that takes care of the negative exponent. Number 3, we're going to actually use rule number 3, which is to raise everything inside the parentheses to that power. Now remember that the 2 has an exponent of 1 on it, and when you raise everything to that third power, you're multiplying the exponents. So we're going to have 2 to the third x to the 9th. 2 to the third is a pretty small number, 2 times 2 times 2, so that's 8. So we can go ahead and simplify that. Number 4, I would combine like terms on top, so I would use rule 1 to simplify the top first. So I'm going to add those exponents to get x to the 16th over x to the 3rd, and then I'm going to use rule number, it looks like we need a rule number 7 here. So if we have a to the m over a to the n, and we are dividing, then you have to subtract those exponents, so a to the m minus n. So we are going to use rule number 7 and get x to the 13th for our final answer. Number 5, we're going to use rule number 3 and raise everything to the second power, and when you do that, you multiply the exponents to get x to the 7th, just kidding, x to the 10th, y to the 8th. Now you cannot go any further on this one because they do not have like bases, so x to the 10th and y to the 8th has to stay just like that. Number 6, I am first going to use rule number 2 and multiply those exponents, so we get x to the 14th, and then this one stays exactly the same. There's not really much that we can do with it. As a matter of fact, if you want to drop the parentheses because it's all multiplication, you can do that. And so when we simplify this, I'm going to put my whole number out front, the 4, and then I'm going to use rule number 1 for the x to the 14th times x to the 3rd to get x to the 17th. Alright, looking at number 7, we will first use rule number 3 and raise everything in the first set of parentheses to the third power. And when we do so, we multiply the exponents. And in the second set of parentheses, we're going to raise everything to the second power. And then we can go ahead and simplify further. So 3 cubed is 3 times 3 times 3, which is 27. 2 squared is 4. And this is all multiplication. So what we're going to do is multiply the 27 times 4 and get 108. And then we have x to the 6th times x to the negative 6th, which is x to the 0, because if we use rule number 2, rule number 1, we will add those exponents. If you look at rule number 5, anything to the power of 0 is just 1, so really that's 108 times 1, or 108. Alright, number 8, to begin, because we're multiplying with a fraction here, I'm going to put the x to the 7th over 1. When you multiply fractions, you multiply straight across, so 1 times anything is itself, so we're going to have x to the 7th over x to the 4th. Now we're going to use rule number 7 and subtract the exponents, so we get x to the 3rd. Number 9, we are going to use rule number 4 and raise everything in the parentheses to the second power. And when we do so, again, we are going to multiply those exponents. So we get x to the 14th over 2 squared. But we know that 2 squared is 4, so we're going to have x to the 14th over 4. Number 8, the only thing that we can, or number 10, the only thing that we can really do on this one is get rid of that negative exponent. And if you look at rule number 6, it says that we're going to flip negative exponents. So I'm going to draw my fraction bar and I'm going to say top or bottom or flip or stay. So the 8 really has a positive 1 as an exponent on it. So since that exponent is positive, it's going to stay on top. X to the negative 3 is going to flip to the bottom because of the negative exponent, and y squared is going to stay on top because of the positive exponent. The key here is putting that 1 on the 8. Don't think that that has to stay attached to the x. This is as far as we can go. We can't combine the y's and the y and the x because those are different bases. Number 11, what I would recommend is using rule number 3 first and raising everything in the parentheses to the negative second. So we have 5 to the negative 2, x to the negative 6 because you multiply the exponents, and y to the positive 8 because a negative times a negative is a positive. At this point I know we have negative exponents, so we're going to draw a fraction bar and say flip or stay. 5 to the negative 2 is going to flip to the bottom because of the negative exponent. X to the negative 6th is going to flip to the bottom because of the negative exponent, and y to the 8th is going to stay on the top because of the positive exponent. Only the negative exponents are going to flip. We know that 5 squared is 25, so we can write our final answer as y to the 8th over 25 x to the 6th. Finally, number 12. On bottom, we will use rule number 3 and distribute in that exponent. And then we're going to ask ourselves, flip or stay. And that 3 has an exponent of 1 that is implied. So because the 3 has a positive exponent, it is going to stay on top. 2 has a negative exponent, so we're going to flip that to the top. And then x has a negative exponent, so we're going to flip that to the top. So everything in this problem actually ends up on the top. If you put it over 1, no big deal, but it is not necessary. To simplify this, we're going to have 3 times 2 cubed. Well, 2 cubed is 8. Make sure you do your exponents first, because please excuse my dear Aunt Sally says exponents first. And then we can multiply the 3 times 8. 3 times 8 is 24, and then we have x cubed.